The train's whistle cut through the December cold like a blade through silk, announcing its arrival at Frontier Hollow Station. Steam billowed into the gray afternoon sky, mixing with the falling snow that had been painting the Oregon Territory white for 3 days straight. Among the passengers stepping down onto the frozen platform, one woman moved with deliberate slowness, as if each step required careful consideration. Eliza Hart stood tall despite the weight pressing on her shoulders, not from the worn leather valise she carried, but from something far heavier that no one could see. At 26, she possessed the kind of beauty that hard living had refined rather than diminished high cheekbones, dark hair pinned severely beneath a practical bonnet, and gray eyes that held depths most folks found uncomfortable to meet. Her traveling dress, though clean and properly mended, showed the telltale signs of having seen better days. She scanned the platform, searching among the waiting faces for one in particular. Samuel Morrison had promised in his letters, those carefully penned missives that had traveled 2,000 miles east, that he would be here, that he would take her hand, lead her to the parson, and make her Mrs. Morrison before the sun set on her first day in Frontier Hollow. But Samuel was nowhere to be seen. The platform gradually emptied as other passengers found their welcomers' wives embracing husbands, children tugging at their fathers' coats, sweethearts stealing quick kisses despite the public setting. Eliza remained motionless, a solitary figure against the weathered boards of the station, while the train conductor called final boarding for those continuing west. "Ma'am," the station master, a portly man with kind eyes behind wire spectacles, approached her cautiously. "Someone meeting you gets mighty cold once that sun dips behind the mountains." "Yes," Eliza replied, though certainty had already begun to crack like ice under spring warmth. "Mr. Samuel Morrison. Perhaps he's been delayed by the weather." The station master's expression shifted a flicker of recognition, followed by something that might have been pity. "Morrison. You say tall fellow. Works at the Brackenridge mine." "That's him." Hope flickered in her chest. "Haven't seen him in town for, must be 2 weeks now. Heard tell he took work at a mine up in Montana Territory. Left real sudden like." He paused, clearly wrestling with how much more to say. "Didn't mention nothing about expecting anyone?" The words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples through everything Eliza had built her future upon. 2 weeks. Samuel had been gone 2 weeks, which meant he'd left shortly after sending his last letter, the one promising eternal devotion, the one that had finally convinced her to sell everything, buy a train ticket, and travel across a continent to marry a man she'd never met face to face. "I see." Her voice remained steady, a skill learned through necessity. "Thank you for the information." The station master lingered, clearly wanting to offer more help, but uncertain how. "There's a boarding house on Main Street. Mrs. Clearwater runs a respectable establishment. She might have a room." "Thank you," Eliza repeated, effectively dismissing him. She couldn't afford a boarding house, respectable or otherwise. The journey had taken nearly every cent she'd saved, leaving just enough for a few meals and perhaps one night's lodging if absolutely necessary. As the station master retreated to his warm office, Eliza moved to a bench partially sheltered by the station's overhanging roof. She sat carefully, arranging her skirts, and placed the valise beside her. Inside were all her worldly possessions: 2 dresses, undergarments, her mother's Bible, a sewing kit that had been her grandmother's, and 43 cents. The snow continued to fall, thick flakes that caught on her eyelashes and melted against her cheeks. She didn't brush them away. There seemed little point in maintaining appearances now, with no one to maintain them for. She'd been so certain this time would be different. Samuel's letters had seemed genuine, his plans specific and practical. He'd sent a tintype of himself, a serious-faced man with neat whiskers and honest eyes. He'd written about the house he was building, about the life they'd share, about how he needed a good woman to make Frontier Hollow feel like home. But then Thomas had seemed genuine too, back in Chicago. The memory surfaced unbidden. Sharp as winter wind her wedding night 3 years ago. The boarding house room that smelled of coal smoke and boiled cabbage. Thomas's hands rough with drink. His words when morning came. "You ain't what I expected," he'd said, not meeting her eyes as he dressed. "Too cold, I don't know, like trying to warm myself against a statue." He'd left before breakfast, taking with him not just her innocence, but something more fundamental, her belief that she might be worth staying for. The marriage had been annulled within a week. Thomas had claimed non-consummation, a lie that Eliza hadn't contested because the truth was somehow worse that she'd been tried and found wanting, that whatever warmth other women possessed had been left out of her making. She'd returned to her position as a seamstress, let the gossip wash over her like rain, and sworn she'd never again trust a man with her heart or her future. Until Samuel's first letter arrived, forwarded by her cousin who'd moved west the year before. Now here she sat, having broken her own promise, having risked everything on the word of another man who'd found her unworthy of even a farewell. The sun began its descent toward the mountains, painting the snow-covered peaks orange and pink. Beautiful, Eliza thought distantly. At least she'd seen the western mountains before. Before what, she had no return ticket, no position waiting back east, no family who'd welcome a woman foolish enough to chase after a mail-order marriage. Other travelers passed by, heads bent against the wind, hurrying toward warm destinations. A few glanced at her curiously. A well-dressed woman sitting alone as evening approached was unusual enough to merit attention. But this was the frontier. People minded their own business unless invited to do otherwise. Eliza pulled her wool shawl tighter. Though it did little against the dropping temperature, she'd need to make a decision soon. Find somewhere to shelter for the night, then perhaps seek employment in the morning. Frontier towns always needed seamstresses, though finding respectable work might prove challenging for a woman with no references and no connections. She closed her eyes briefly, allowing herself one moment of despair. In that darkness, she made a silent vow never again would she speak of that night with Thomas, of the confusion and pain and ultimate rejection. That secret would remain buried, along with the foolish hope that someone might want her despite it. She'd survived once by building walls around her heart. She could do so again. The sound of boots on wooden boards made her open her eyes. A man stood before her, tall enough to block the dying light, dressed in the practical garb of a working man, canvas pants, heavy coat, hat pulled low against the weather. He didn't speak immediately, just studied her with dark eyes that seemed to take in more than she'd prefer to show. "Been sitting here a while," he observed, voice low and measured. Not a question, just a statement of fact. "Yes," Eliza agreed, seeing no point in denial. "Someone's supposed to meet you." "It appears not." He nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something he'd already suspected. "Gets down to near freezing tonight. Snow's supposed to get heavier too." "I'm aware." Another nod. He shifted his weight, seemed to consider his words carefully. "Got a spare room at my place, nothing fancy, but it's warm and dry. You'd be welcome to it." The offer was so unexpected that for a moment Eliza couldn't form a response. Men didn't offer shelter to strange women without expecting something in return. Her hand instinctively moved to her throat, a protective gesture she'd developed since Chicago. I have no money for rent." Didn't ask for any. His expression remained neutral, unreadable. "Just offering a roof and a fire. What you do come morning is your business." "Why?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "You don't know me." He was quiet for a long moment, gaze moving from her to the empty platform to the darkening sky. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that suggested words carefully chosen. "Know enough. Know you came a long way for something that ain't here. Know you're too proud to ask for help and too smart to freeze for the sake of that pride. Know you're calculating whether accepting makes you beholden in ways you don't care to be." He met her eyes directly. "It doesn't. Just an offer. Free and clear. Take it or leave it." Eliza searched his face for signs of deception, for the hungry look she'd learned to recognize in Thomas and others. Found nothing but a steady patience, as if he had all the time in the world for her to make up her mind. "I don't even know your name," she said finally. "Weston Cole." He touched the brim of his hat briefly. "Run a small ranch about 2 miles north of town. Nothing grand, but it keeps—" Eliza Hart. She stood slowly. Decision made by necessity, if not comfort. "I accept your offer, Mr. Cole, with the understanding that it's for tonight only." "Fair enough." He bent to pick up her valise before she could protest. "Wagons this way." As she followed him through the swirling snow, Eliza kept one hand on the small pistol in her coat pocket, another hard lesson learned in Chicago. Weston Cole might seem different, might offer help without visible strings, but she'd been fooled before. Never again would she trust easily. Never again would she speak of that night that had marked her as somehow lacking. She'd survived one broken promise, one shattering of illusions. She could survive another. All it required was keeping her heart locked away where no one, not Samuel Morrison, not this taciturn rancher, not anyone could touch it again. The wagon waited beyond the station, horses stamping against the cold, as Weston helped her climb aboard with an impersonal touch that somehow reassured more than gentleness would have. Eliza cast one last look back at the empty platform. Somewhere out there, Samuel Morrison was living his life unburdened by the promises he'd made. She briefly wondered if he'd ever given her a passing thought, if he'd wondered what became of the woman he'd courted through letters and then abandoned. It didn't matter. What mattered was surviving the night, then the next day, then the next. What mattered was never again being foolish enough to believe she deserved more than survival. The wagon lurched into motion, carrying her away from the station and toward an uncertain shelter. Behind them, the train whistle sounded one final time, a lonesome cry that echoed everything Eliza Hart refused to let herself feel. The wagon wheels crunched through fresh snow as they left Frontier Hollow behind, the town's scattered lights growing dim in the early winter darkness. Eliza sat rigid on the wooden bench, her gloved hands folded tightly in her lap, maintaining a careful distance from the man beside her. Weston Cole handled the reins with practiced ease, seemingly unbothered by either the weather or the silence that stretched between them. She studied him from the corner of her eye, this stranger who'd offered shelter without apparent expectation. He was perhaps 35, with the kind of weathered features that suggested a life lived outdoors. His profile was strong, but unremarkable nose that had been broken at least once, jaw shadowed with a day's growth of beard, lines around his eyes that could have come from squinting into the sun or from laughter. She suspected the former. "Cold?" he asked without turning, apparently sensing her scrutiny. "I'm fine." He reached behind the seat and pulled out a thick wool blanket, setting it on the bench between them. "In case you change your mind." Eliza stared at the blanket for a long moment before pride gave way to practicality. She unfolded it across her lap, careful not to let it bridge the space between them. "Thank you." Another mile passed in silence. The snow fell heavier now, large flakes that danced in the wagon's lantern light. The horses moved steadily, clearly familiar with the route despite the poor visibility. Eliza found herself wondering how many times Weston Cole had made this journey alone, and why he'd chosen tonight to offer company to a stranger. "You didn't ask," she said suddenly, the words escaping before she could reconsider. "Ask what?" "Why I was sitting there. Who was supposed to meet me. Why they didn't—" She kept her eyes fixed on the darkness ahead. Most people would have asked. Weston adjusted his grip on the reins. "Considering—" "Figure if you wanted to tell it, you would. If you don't, that's your business." "And if I'm running from something, a husband, perhaps the law. Are you—" "No." He nodded as if that settled the matter. "Then it doesn't much matter what brought you here, does it? You're here now. Rest is just history." Eliza didn't know what to make of such casual acceptance. In her experience, People always wanted to know more, to pry, to judge, to categorize. Thomas had asked endless questions during their brief courtship, had wanted to know every detail of her past as if collecting evidence for some future prosecution. Even Samuel's letters had been full of queries about her life, her family, her reasons for answering his advertisement. But this man seemed content with surfaces, with the simple fact of her presence rather than the complex story behind it. "That's your philosophy?" she asked. "The past doesn't matter. Matters to the person carrying it. Doesn't have to matter to anyone else unless they choose to share the load." He glanced at her briefly. "Most folks out here are running from something or towards something. Sometimes both. Long as they're peaceable about it, I don't see cause to dig." They turned off the main road onto a narrower track, marked only by a break in the fence line. The horses picked up their pace slightly, recognizing home despite the darkness. Through the snow, Eliza could make out the shape of buildings, a modest 2-story house, a barn, what might be a chicken coop. "It's not much," Weston said as they approached, an echo of his earlier warning. "But it's solid." The house was indeed modest, built of logs chinked with mortar, with a stone chimney that released a steady stream of smoke into the night air. But the windows glowed warmly with lamplight, and the porch, while simple, was swept clear of snow. Everything about the place spoke of careful maintenance, of a man who took pride in what he'd built, even if it wasn't grand. Weston pulled the wagon up to the barn, jumping down to tend to the horses. "Go on inside," he said, handing her valise down. "Door's not locked. I'll be along once I get these two settled." Eliza hesitated. Entering a strange man's house alone felt like crossing a line she'd drawn for herself. But the cold was seeping through her coat, and the alternative was standing in a barn while he worked. She took her valise and made her way to the front door. The house's interior was exactly what the exterior had promised: simple, clean, functional. The main room served as both parlor and dining area, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall. The furniture was handmade but skillfully done: a table with 4 chairs, a rocking chair near the fire, a bookshelf holding a surprising number of volumes. Everything was neat, orderly, with none of the bachelor squalor she might have expected. She stood uncertainly near the door, unwilling to presume too much. The fire crackled invitingly, and she could smell something cooking: a stew, perhaps, simmering on the stove, visible through a doorway that must lead to the kitchen. The door opened behind her, bringing a gust of cold air, and Weston stamping snow from his boots. He took in her position near the door, and something that might have been amusement crossed his features. "Planning to stand there all night?" "I didn't want to presume." "You're a guest, Miss Hart. Guests sit by the fire and warm themselves." He hung his coat on a peg by the door, then moved past her to add another log to the flames. "Hungry got stew that's been simmering most of the day." Her stomach answered before she could, a sound that would have mortified her under other circumstances. She hadn't eaten since early morning, having saved her few coins in case of emergency. "I'll take that as a yes." He disappeared into the kitchen without waiting for a response. Eliza finally moved to the rocking chair, sitting carefully on its edge. The heat from the fire was almost painful against her cold skin, but wonderfully so. She pulled off her gloves and held her hands toward the flames, watching her fingers slowly regain their color. Weston returned with 2 bowls of stew and chunks of brown bread. He handed her one bowl matter-of-factly, then settled into a straight-backed chair across from her with his own. The stew was simple beef, potatoes, carrots, onions, but well seasoned and blessedly hot. They ate in silence for several minutes. Eliza found herself stealing glances around the room, trying to piece together who this man was from his surroundings. The books suggested education, or at least curiosity. The furniture spoke of self-sufficiency, but there were no photographs, no mementos, nothing that hinted at family or connections beyond this isolated ranch. "How long have you lived here?" she asked, needing to fill the silence with something. 6 years, claimed the land, built the house, Run about 50 head of cattle. He broke off a piece of bread, sopped up stew with it. It's good land. Honest work. Alone. Mostly. Hire help during branding and drives. He looked at her directly. If you're asking if there's a Mrs. Cole, there isn't, hasn't been, won't be anyone arriving unexpected come morning. Heat rose in Eliza's cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire. I didn't mean... You did, and you had right to. Woman needs to know what kind of situation she's walking into. His tone held no offense. Speaking of which, stairs at the end of the hall lead up. 2 rooms upstairs. Take the one on the right, bed's made up fresh. Locks on the inside of the door if you're minded to use it. The casual mention of a lock eased something in her chest. And you... Got a perfectly good spot down here. He indicated a corner where blankets were folded neatly on a chest. Done it before when I've had folks passing through. This happens often, taking in strays. A smile ghosted across his features, gone almost before she registered it. Now and again, frontier's hard enough without folks making it harder by turning their backs on those in need. Eliza set down her empty bowl, studying this unusual man. And you trust so easily. What if I rob you in the night? What if I'm not what I seem? Are you planning to rob me? No. Are you something other than a woman who got left at a train station in winter with nowhere to go? She thought of Thomas, of that night, of all the ways she was indeed something other than what she seemed. But that wasn't what he was asking. No. Then I reckon we understand each other well enough. He stood, gathering their bowls. Like I said before, you're free to leave come morning, or you can stay a few days. Figure out your next move. Town's always needing seamstresses, if that's your trade. How did you... She looked down at her hands, seeing what he'd seen, the calluses on her fingers, the tiny scars from years of needle pricks, the way she'd unconsciously rubbed her thumb while eating. A habit born from easing cramps after long hours of sewing. Not much escapes notice out here, he said simply. Helps to pay attention to folks, even when you're not prying into their business. He disappeared into the kitchen again. Eliza heard the sound of washing up, the domestic clatter somehow soothing in its ordinariness. She rose and moved to the bookshelf, running her fingers along the spines. Shakespeare, surprisingly. A Bible, less surprisingly. Books on cattle management, agriculture, veterinary medicine, but also poetry. Wordsworth. Keats, a book of Greek philosophy. You can borrow any that interest you, Weston said, returning. Gets long in the evenings come winter. You're an educated man. My mother was a school teacher, insisted on it. He moved to bank the fire for the night. Education's free for the taking if you've got books and curiosity. Don't need fancy schools for that. Eliza thought of her own education, cut short by necessity when her parents died. She'd continued reading when she could, but books were a luxury a working seamstress could rarely afford. I should retire, she said, suddenly aware of the impropriety of lingering in conversation with him. I'll get a lamp. He lit a small oil lamp from the fire and handed it to her. Extra blankets in the chest at the foot of the bed if you need them. Water pitcher's full. If you need anything in the night, just call down. She took the lamp, their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. His hands were calloused, warm, steady. She pulled back quickly. Mr. Cole, she began, not sure what she wanted to say. Thank you seemed insufficient. Why are you doing this seemed ungrateful. Weston, he corrected gently. And you're welcome. Whatever it is you're trying to say, you're welcome. Eliza climbed the stairs slowly, lamp casting shifting shadows on the walls. The room on the right was as promised simple but clean, with a bed covered in a colorful quilt, a washstand, a small wardrobe, and a door with a sturdy bolt on the inside. She set the lamp on the bedside table and turned the bolt, hearing it slide home with a solid thunk. Then she sat on the edge of the bed, finally allowing herself to absorb the strangeness of the day. This morning she'd awakened on a train, full of nervous hope about meeting Samuel. Tonight she was in a stranger's house, dependent on a kindness she didn't understand and wasn't sure she could trust. Through the floor, she could hear Weston moving around below, the ordinary sounds of a man preparing for bed. No footsteps on the stairs, no testing of her door, just the quiet sounds of someone respecting the boundaries he'd established. For the first time since leaving the station, Eliza allowed her rigid control to ease slightly. She wouldn't cry. She'd lost that ability the morning Thomas had looked at her with such disappointment. But she could admit, here in this borrowed room, that she was grateful. Grateful for warmth, for food, for a door that locked from the inside. And perhaps most surprisingly, grateful for a man who didn't ask questions, who didn't look at her with curiosity or pity or speculation, who offered what he had without making her feel beholden for taking it. Tomorrow she would have to make decisions, find work, establish herself somehow in this frontier town that hadn't been her destination. But tonight, she had shelter freely given. As she prepared for bed, Eliza found herself thinking about Weston Cole's philosophy that the past only mattered to the person carrying it. It was a foreign concept to someone who'd been defined by her past, marked by it in ways both visible and hidden. But perhaps, in a place where everyone was running from or toward something, there was room for a woman who'd never speak of her first night. Perhaps here, she could be just Eliza Hart, seamstress, rather than Eliza Hart. Abandoned bride, failed wife, woman found wanting. The thought was almost hopeful, and hope, Eliza had learned, was dangerous. But as she lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the snow tap against the window and the house settle around her, she couldn't quite extinguish that tiny flame. Tomorrow she would be practical, guarded, careful. Tonight, she would sleep in a room with a door that locked, in a house owned by a man who asked for nothing more than what she chose to give. It wasn't trust. She wouldn't call it trust. But it was, perhaps, a beginning. The first sound Eliza heard upon waking was the steady rhythm of an axe splitting wood. Gray morning light filtered through the frost-etched window, and for a disorienting moment, she couldn't place where she was. Then memory rushed back the empty train platform. Weston Cole's unexpected offer. This borrowed room with its door that locked from the inside. She dressed quickly in her second dress, a practical brown wool that had seen better days but was clean and properly mended. Her fingers worked through the familiar motions of pinning her hair, though the small mirror above the washstand showed purple shadows beneath her eyes that spoke of restless sleep despite the comfortable bed. The splitting stopped as she descended the stairs. She found Weston in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, making coffee. He glanced up at her entrance but didn't comment on the late hour, nearly 8 by the clock on the mantel. "Morning," he said simply, pouring a second cup without asking if she wanted one. "Breakfast is nothing fancy. Biscuits and gravy. Some preserved peaches if you're inclined." "You needn't have." "Already made." He set the cup before her. "Eat first, then we'll talk about what comes next." The coffee was strong, better than anything she'd had in months. The biscuits were clearly bachelor cooking, a bit heavy, slightly lopsided, but the gravy was well seasoned and filling. They ate without conversation, a silence that felt less awkward than it should have between strangers. When they finished, Weston leaned back in his chair, studying her with those dark eyes that seemed to miss little. "You'll be needing work, I expect." "Yes." She met his gaze steadily. "I'm a seamstress, as you noted, competent with both everyday mending and finer work. And Mrs. Patterson runs the general store with her husband. She's been complaining about her arthritis, making it hard to keep up with the mending folks bring in. Might be she'd welcome help." He paused, seeming to choose his words. "Course, she'll want to know where you're staying. Small town like this, respectability matters." Heat crept up Eliza's neck. Of course, an unmarried woman couldn't simply take residence with a bachelor rancher, no matter how innocent the arrangement. "I understand. Perhaps the boarding house." "Gets expensive quick," And Martha Clearwater's a gossip besides. He stood, refilling his coffee. There's another option. If you're amenable. She waited, hands folded carefully around her cup. The old foreman's cabin sits about 50 yards from the main house. Haven't used it since Jake moved on last spring, but it's sound, has its own stove, bed, necessaries. You could set up there, make it proper, close enough for safety, far enough for propriety. Eliza turned this over in her mind, looking for hidden traps. And the rent? Wasn't planning on charging any. That's not. She stopped, frustrated. You can't simply give me free lodging. People will talk regardless. Let them. His tone was mild, but there was steel beneath it. I've found folks will talk no matter what you do. Might as well do what seems right and let them chew over it as they please. And what seems right to you is housing a complete stranger. He considered this, gaze moving to the window where snow still fell lightly. What seems right is not letting someone freeze for the sake of what busybodies might whisper. You need a place. I have a place sitting empty. Simple as that. Nothing's ever that simple. It can be, if folks let it. He moved to the stove, banking the fire. Come on, I'll show you the cabin. You can decide for yourself. Eliza rose, recognizing she had little choice but to follow. Her 43 cents wouldn't cover even one night at the boarding house, and she needed an address if she hoped to find employment. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford, though it galled her to be so dependent on this man's inexplicable generosity. The cabin was indeed close to the main house, connected by a shoveled path. It was tiny, one room with a lean-to addition that served as storage but solidly built. Weston opened the door and lit a lamp against the morning gloom. Stove works fine, he said, demonstrating the damper. Jake left the furniture bed, table, 2 chairs, some shelves. There's a well out back, shared with the main house. Privy's there too. Eliza moved through the small space, noting the thick chinking between logs, the tight-fitting windows, the bed frame that would hold the straw tick currently rolled in the corner. It was rough, certainly, but no worse than some places she'd lived in Chicago. Better, in fact, because it was private, contained, hers alone if she chose. Why? She asked suddenly, turning to face him. What do you gain from this? Weston leaned against the doorframe, seeming to give the question genuine consideration. Peace of mind, maybe, knowing I didn't turn my back when I could help. He paused. My mother used to say that kindness costs nothing but pays dividends you might never see. Never had cause to doubt her wisdom. And if I'm not kind, if I'm... She stopped, unsure how to articulate what Thomas had found so lacking in her. If you're what? His voice was patient, curious without being pressing. Nothing. She turned back to examine the shelves, running a finger along the dusty wood. The cabin will suit, but I insist on some form of rent once I'm employed. I won't be a charity case. Fair enough. We can settle on terms once you're earning. He straightened. I'll bring some firewood over. Get the place warmed up. You'll want to air out the bedding, maybe sweep some. I can ask in town about Mrs. Patterson when I go for supplies this afternoon. I can inquire myself. Could, but she knows me. A word from a neighbor might smooth the way. He must have seen something in her expression because he added, not charity, just practical. That's how things work out here, folks helping where they can. An hour later, the cabin was warming nicely, fire crackling in the small stove. Weston had hauled in enough wood for several days, along with a bucket of water and some basic supplies, a loaf of bread, butter, eggs, a small sack of coffee. When Eliza protested, he'd simply said she could settle up later and continued carrying things in. Now she stood in her new temporary home, trying to make sense of the situation. The cabin needed work dust everywhere, cobwebs in the corners, the musty smell of a place too long closed up. But it was shelter, private shelter, with a door she could bar and windows she could curtain. A knock interrupted her inventory. Come, she called, expecting Weston. But it was a woman who entered short, sturdy, perhaps 40, with graying hair pinned severely back and sharp blue eyes that took in everything at once. "So you're the one Weston fetched from the station," the woman said without preamble. "I'm Ruth Holcomb. Live at the next ranch over, about 2 miles north. Saw the smoke from the cabin and figured I'd best come introduce myself." Eliza Hart. She wasn't sure whether to be pleased or wary of this sudden neighborly interest. "I appreciate the welcome." Ruth's expression suggested she reserved judgment on whether a welcome was warranted. "Weston sent word you might be looking for work. Seamstress," he said. "News traveled fast on the frontier. Apparently. Yes, I've done both practical mending and finer work dresses, alterations, embroidery when called for." "Show me your hands." It was such an unexpected command that Eliza complied without thinking, extending both hands palm up. Ruth examined them like a horse trader checking teeth, noting the calluses, the tiny scars, the slight permanent bend to her right forefinger from years of holding a needle. "Working hands," Ruth concluded with apparent approval. "Not some Eastern lady playing at trade? Good. Martha Patterson's been moaning about needing help for months. I'll put in a word. Can you start tomorrow if she agrees?" Yes, of course." "Good." Ruth moved to inspect the cabin with the same thorough attention she'd given Eliza's hands. "Place needs a woman's touch. I've got some spare curtains you can have, and a rug that might cover the worst of these floorboards. No sense living rough if you don't have to." "That's very kind, but—" "Not kindness. Sense. You'll be our neighbor for however long you stay. Reflects on all of us if you're living in squalor." She turned that sharp gaze back on Eliza. "How long are you planning to stay?" "I don't know yet." Running from something or toward something. The echo of Weston's words from the night before made Eliza blink. "Does everyone here ask that?" "Most do, though not always out loud." Ruth's expression softened fractionally. "Not prying, girl. Just trying to gauge whether you're the settling kind or the moving on kind. Makes a difference in how much effort folks put into knowing you." "I honestly don't know yet," Eliza admitted. "I came here to marry, but—" She gestured helplessly. "But the man proved faithless. Happens more than you'd think. Men get lonely, write pretty letters, make promises. Then reality shows up and they rabbit." Ruth snorted. "Better to find out before the wedding than after, I say." If only she knew, Eliza thought, remembering Thomas's rejection after their wedding night. Aloud, she said, "Perhaps you're right." "Course I'm right. Been right about most things for 40 years. But there was humor in it now. Well, no sense dwelling on faithless men. You're here now. You've got shelter and prospect of work. Rest will sort itself in time." She moved toward the door, then paused. "Word of advice, Weston Cole's a good man, better than most, but he's also been alone a long time by choice. Don't mistake kindness for interest, if you take my meaning." Heat flooded Eliza's cheeks. "I assure you, I have no such—" "Good. Keep it that way. Man doesn't need complications, and you don't need more heartache." Ruth's expression was not unkind, just matter of fact. "I'll send my boy Carl over with those curtains, and I'll speak to Martha today. Be ready to show her some samples of your work if you've got any." She left as abruptly as she'd come, leaving Eliza standing in the middle of the cabin feeling as though she'd been thoroughly examined and provisionally approved. It was unsettling, but also oddly reassuring. Ruth Holcomb might be blunt, but she seemed genuinely interested in helping. The rest of the morning passed in cleaning. Eliza swept and scrubbed, aired the bedding, arranged her few possessions on the shelves. She found a certain peace in the physical work, in transforming the neglected space into something habitable. Around noon, she became aware of movement outside and looked through the window to see Weston working on something near the wood pile. She watched for a moment, noting the easy rhythm of his movements, the way he paused occasionally to study whatever he was building. She shouldn't go out. It would seem like seeking his attention, but courtesy demanded she at least thank him for arranging Ruth's visit. She found him constructing what looked like a simple bench. "For the porch," he explained when she approached. "Figured you might want somewhere to sit come spring." Spring. The assumption that she'd still be here made something flutter in her chest. Mrs. Holcomb came by. Ruth's good people. Bit forthright, but she means well. She seemed to think you'd already spoken to Mrs. Patterson about employment. He tested the bench's stability, not looking at her. "Mentioned it might when I saw Carl Holcomb in town earlier. News travels. I seem to be accumulating a significant debt to you." Now he did look up. Expression serious. "No debt. Neighbors help neighbors. Today you need help. Tomorrow maybe I will. That's how it works." "I'm not used to—" She stopped, unsure how to explain a world where everything had a price, where kindness always came with strings attached. "I know." His voice was gentle. "But you're not there anymore. You're here. Different rules apply." She wanted to ask why he was alone, why a man who seemed so naturally kind had chosen isolation. But that would be prying, and he'd shown her the courtesy of not prying into her own past. "I should let you work," she said instead. "Eliza," her name on his lips stopped her retreat. "You keep looking for the trap, the hidden cost. I understand why world's full of folks who take advantage. But sometimes a bench is just a bench, and shelter is just shelter, and help is just help." She studied his face, looking for the deception that must be there, found only steady patience and something that might have been understanding. "I'm not used to men who don't want anything from me," she said quietly, more honest than she'd meant to be. "I know that too." He went back to his work. "But wanting and taking are different things, and a man can choose to do neither." That night, alone in her cabin with the fire burning low and curtains delivered as promised by Ruth's son covering the windows, Eliza lay in the narrow bed and tried to make sense of the day. She'd expected struggle, possibly danger, certainly hardship. Instead, she'd found practical help freely given, neighbors who asked questions but didn't demand answers, and a man who seemed to want nothing more than her safety and comfort. It was unsettling. She'd built her defenses against cruelty, indifference, and masculine desire. She had no defense against simple kindness. Through the window, she could see lamplight in the main house. Was Weston reading one of those books, writing letters, simply sitting by his fire as she sat by hers? Two solitary souls separated by 50 yards and infinitely more. She'd told him she wasn't used to men who didn't want anything from her. What she hadn't said was that she wasn't sure how to exist in a world where that was possible, where a woman could be valued for more than what she could provide in the marriage bed or the workplace, where someone might offer help simply because it was needed. Tomorrow she would go to town, present herself to Mrs. Patterson, begin building some kind of life in this place she'd never meant to come to. She would work, earn her keep, maintain proper distance from the man who'd inexplicably saved her from the cold. But tonight, as snow began to fall again outside her borrowed window, Eliza allowed herself to believe just for a moment that perhaps the world contained more possibilities than she'd imagined, that perhaps a woman who'd been found wanting could still find worth, that perhaps kindness could exist without cost. It was a dangerous thought. Hope always was. But in the warmth of her little cabin, with a door that locked and curtains that shut out the world, Eliza Hart found herself hoping anyway. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm as natural as breathing, though Eliza couldn't have said exactly when the pattern established itself. Each morning, she woke to find fresh water already drawn from the well, the bucket sitting just outside her door. She never saw Weston leave it, but she knew no one else would have thought to spare her the cold morning walk. At first, she'd tried to rise earlier to catch him in the act, to thank him or perhaps tell him such gestures weren't necessary, but he seemed to possess an uncanny ability to complete the task just before she stirred, no matter how early she woke. Eventually, she accepted it as she was learning to accept other small kindnesses wordlessly, with a gratitude she didn't quite know how to express. Her work at Patterson's General Store had begun the day after Ruth Holcomb's promised introduction. Mrs. Patterson, a bird-like woman with sharp eyes and swollen knuckles, had tested her with a basket of mending that included everything from simple torn seams to a delicate lace collar that needed invisible repair. Well, Mrs. Patterson had said after examining Eliza's work, "You'll do. $2 a week plus any extra piecework folks bring in special. You can work in the back room. There's good light and fewer distractions." It wasn't much, but it was respectable employment. More than that, it was independence. Eliza threw herself into the work with a dedication that surprised even Mrs. Patterson, arriving early and staying late, taking on the most challenging repairs without complaint. The back room became her sanctuary of sorts. Through the thin wall, she could hear the comings and goings of town life farmers discussing crop prices, women gossiping over fabric selections, children begging for penny candy. But she remained separate from it all, hidden away with her needles and thread, exactly as she preferred. It was on a Thursday, 3 weeks into her employment, that the careful balance shifted. She was wrestling with a particularly stubborn wedding dress alteration when she heard his voice in the main store, Weston, asking Patterson about feed prices. The sound shouldn't have made her fingers pause on the silk, shouldn't have made her strain to hear Patterson's reply. But it did. "That Miss Hart's working out well?" Mrs. Patterson was saying. "Best seamstress I've had, doesn't chatter or dawdle like the last girl." "Good to hear." Weston's response was typically brief. "Still staying out at your place? Is she?" "In the foreman's cabin. Proper enough." Mrs. Patterson's tone carried worlds of meaning in that single sound. "Well, I suppose, though folks do talk. Folks always talk. Martha, they'd talk if she lived with the angels themselves." A pause, then Mrs. Patterson again, voice lowered but still audible. "She's a pretty thing, despite that standoffish way she has. You ever think about—" "My thinking's my own business." Not harsh, but firm enough to close that line of inquiry. Eliza found herself holding her breath, needle poised above the silk. Through the doorway, she caught a glimpse of Weston's profile as he accepted his purchases. He glanced toward the back room, and for a moment their eyes met through the gap. Something passed between them, acknowledgement, perhaps, or understanding. Then he touched his hat brim and was gone. She returned to her work, but her hands weren't quite steady. It wasn't the first time she'd overheard such speculation. The women of Frontier Hollow had been circling the subject for weeks, some with genuine concern, others with barely concealed envy. Why would Weston Cole, who'd rejected every marriageable woman in the territory, take in a stranger? What was happening out at the Cole ranch that kept her there? The answer, had anyone asked directly, would have disappointed them thoroughly. What happened was nothing. Gloriously, peacefully, nothing. They rarely spoke beyond necessary exchanges. "Morning. Coffee's ready. Thank you for the firewood. Gates fixed." Simple words that required no emotional investment, no careful navigation of dangerous territories. But somehow, in those brief encounters, a language of silence had developed between them. She knew he preferred his coffee black but would add a splash of milk on Sundays. He knew she liked to sit on the cabin porch in the evenings, watching the stars emerge, and had wordlessly added a thick cushion to the bench he'd built. She knew he read late into the night. His lamp was always the last light extinguished. He knew she had nightmares. Sometimes her lamp would flare to life at odd hours, staying lit until dawn. Neither acknowledged these observations. To do so would be to admit they were watching each other, and that admission felt dangerous in ways Eliza didn't care to examine. Now, returning to her needlework, she tried to push away the warmth that had bloomed at his defense of her. He hadn't said anything remarkable, hadn't declared her virtues or claimed any attachment, had simply shut down gossip with the same practical efficiency he applied to everything else. A throat cleared in the doorway. Eliza looked up to find Mrs. Clearwater from the boarding house, holding what appeared to be an entire basketful of linens. "Miss Hart," the woman said, her tone suggesting she'd tasted something sour. "I have some items requiring mending." Eliza rose, setting aside the wedding dress. "Of course. Let me see what you have." "Mrs." Clearwater upended the basket onto the work table with more force than necessary. Sheets, pillowcases, tablecloths, all showing various signs of wear and tear. "I need these by Monday. Can you manage?" It was Thursday afternoon. The amount of work represented would require long hours, but it was certainly possible. "Yes, I can have them ready." "Good." Mrs. Clearwater's eyes narrowed. "I must say, you've done quite well for yourself, from abandoned bride to kept woman in record time." The words hit like cold water. Eliza's hand stilled on the linens. "I beg your pardon." "Oh, come now. We're both women of the world." "Mrs." Clearwater leaned closer, voice dropping conspiratorially. "I don't judge. Times are hard, and Weston Cole's a better prospect than most. Handsome enough, certainly wealthy by frontier standards. Though I am surprised he finally succumbed. The man's been immune to feminine wiles for so long. Some wondered if he preferred other company, if you take my meaning." "I'm sure I don't." Eliza's voice came out steady despite the anger building in her chest. "Mr. Cole has been kind enough to rent me his foreman's cabin. That's the extent of our arrangement." "Rent?" Mrs. Clearwater's smile was knowing. "Is that what they're calling it now?" "That's what it is, now, about your linens." "I wonder what payment he accepts, though I suppose that's obvious enough." The woman's gaze traveled over Eliza with insulting thoroughness. "You're prettier than most, despite that cold way you have. Men do like a challenge." Eliza felt her composure cracking. The familiar shame from her wedding night with Thomas threatened to surface the bewildered hurt of being found lacking, the humiliation of his rejection. But underneath that was something newer, fiercer. Anger not for herself, but for Weston, who'd shown her nothing but respectful kindness. "Mrs. Clearwater," she said quietly, "I'll thank you to keep your speculations to yourself. Mr. Cole is a gentleman who offered shelter to someone in need. Nothing more. Your linens will be ready Monday. Good day." The dismissal was clear, but Mrs. Clearwater wasn't finished. "Pride goes before a fall. Miss Hart, you're not the first woman to think she's different, special. When he tires of you and he will don't come crying to respectable establishments expecting sympathy." She swept out, leaving her linens and her poison behind. Eliza sank into her chair, hands trembling slightly. Not from hurt she'd heard worse in Chicago, but from rage. How dare that woman imply? Suggest? The bell over the front door chimed again. Through the doorway, she saw Weston returning, having apparently forgotten something. He exchanged a few words with Mr. Patterson, then his steps turned toward the back room. He appeared in the doorway, taking in her expression and the scattered linens with a quick glance. "You all right?" "Fine." The word came out sharper than intended. He studied her for a moment. "Martha Clearwater likes to stir the pot. Always has." So he'd heard, or perhaps encountered the woman on her way out. Eliza felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I'm sorry. You shouldn't have to—" "Stop." He stepped into the room, though he maintained a careful distance. "You've got nothing to apologize for. Other people's small minds aren't your responsibility. But they're talking about you, your reputation. Has survived 6 years of speculation about why I don't have a wife, why I don't court, why I keep to myself. A little more won't hurt it any." He paused. "Unless it's making things difficult for you. At work, I mean." "No, Mrs. Patterson doesn't care for gossip." She gestured helplessly at the pile of linens. "Though I seem to have acquired the boarding house's entire mending basket." A slight smile crossed his features. "Martha's way of putting you in your place. She'll be disappointed when you return everything perfectly mended and on time." "How do you know I will?" "Because you're too stubborn to give her the satisfaction of failure." He moved toward the door, then stopped. "I came back to tell you there's a barn cat had kittens in the loft. Thought you might like to see them, if you're interested." It was the first purely social invitation he'd extended. Eliza found herself nodding before she could think better of it. "I'd like that. After supper, then they're more active in the evening." He left, and Eliza returned to her work with renewed energy. Let Mrs. Clearwater and her ilk whisper. She'd show them what she was made of, 40 sheets and pillowcases mended to perfection, every tablecloth restored, all delivered precisely on time. That evening, after a simple meal eaten in her own cabin, Eliza walked the short path to the main barn. She found Weston in the loft, sitting on a hay bale near a wooden crate lined with old blankets. The mother cat, a tortoiseshell with suspicious green eyes, watched warily as they approached. "She's not fond of people," Weston said quietly, "but she tolerates me since I bring food." 5 kittens tumbled over each other in the crate, tiny paws batting at invisible enemies. They couldn't have been more than 3 weeks old, eyes barely open, movements still uncoordinated. "Oh," Eliza breathed, enchanted despite herself. "They're perfect." "Barn'll be overrun if I keep them all. Have to find homes for most once they're weaned." He picked up a gray tabby that had wandered toward the edge, settling it back with its siblings. This one's trouble already. No sense of self-preservation. Eliza sat carefully on the hay, maintaining distance from both Weston and the protective mother. They watched in comfortable silence as the kittens played, tumbled, and eventually collapsed into a sleeping heap. "Thank you," she said eventually, "for what you said earlier about the gossip." "Meant it. People who matter judge by actions, not rumors. Rest aren't worth worrying about." "Still, your life was simpler before I came." "Simpler, maybe." He leaned back against a support post, face half in shadow. "But simple isn't always better. House was too quiet anyway." It was the closest he'd come to expressing any feeling about her presence. Eliza felt something shift in her chest, a dangerous warmth she couldn't afford. "I should go," she said, standing. "Early morning tomorrow." He walked her back to the cabin, their footsteps crunching on frost-hardened ground. At her door, he stopped, seeming to wrestle with words. "Eliza, what Martha Clearwater said, whatever it was, don't let it burrow in. Some people can only see the world through their own dirty windows. Doesn't mean you have to look through them, too." She met his eyes in the moonlight. "How do you know what she said?" "Because I know Martha Clearwater, and I know the look you had when I came back." He touched his hat. "Good night." He was halfway back to the main house when she called out, "Weston!" He turned, waiting. "The gray tabby, the troublesome one. I'd like to take him when he's old enough, if that's acceptable." Even in the darkness, she could see his smile. "I'll save him for you. Seems fitting, one stray looking after another." Later, lying in her narrow bed, Eliza reflected on the day's strange turnings. She'd been propositioned, insulted, defended, and offered a kitten. She'd seen Weston truly smile for the first time. She'd felt anger on someone else's behalf rather than her own. Most dangerously, she'd felt that warmth in her chest grow stronger, despite every wall she'd built against such feelings. Through her window, the main house stood dark except for the reading lamp in what she now knew was Weston's study. She wondered what book held his attention tonight, wondered if he thought of her as she thought of him carefully, distantly, but with increasing frequency. It didn't matter, couldn't matter. She'd learned her lesson about trusting her heart to any man. Thomas had taught her that she was somehow lacking in the warmth men wanted. Samuel had reinforced that she wasn't worth keeping promises to. She wouldn't risk such rejection again. But as she drifted toward sleep, she thought about water buckets appearing like magic, about a bench built for spring sitting, about a man who defended her honor without claiming any rights to it, about small kindnesses that asked nothing in return. Perhaps, she thought drowsily, there were different kinds of warmth in the world, perhaps the kind she could offer steady, quiet, built on mutual respect rather than passion, might be enough for someone. Perhaps. But probably not. Still, when morning came with its fresh water bucket and distant axe fall, Eliza found herself humming as she dressed for work. A dangerous sound. Humming, almost like hope. She'd have to be more careful. Spring arrived slowly to Frontier Hollow, creeping in through longer days and gentler winds. The snow retreated to the mountains, leaving muddy streets and the first brave shoots of green. Eliza had been in town 4 months now, long enough for the initial curiosity about her to fade into the general fabric of daily life. Most days. She was hanging freshly washed curtains in the cabin when she heard the horses approaching. Multiple horses, moving fast. Through the window, she saw Weston emerge from the barn, his posture alert. 3 riders pulled up in the yard, and even from a distance, she could see the tension in their bearing. One man dismounted tall, well-dressed despite the dust of travel, with the kind of bearing that spoke of money and privilege. He said something to Weston that made the rancher's shoulders stiffen. Then the stranger's gaze swept the property and landed on her cabin. On her, visible through the window. A chill ran down Eliza's spine that had nothing to do with the March air. She stepped back from the window but continued watching. The men were talking now, the stranger gesturing broadly while Weston stood with arms crossed, his stance suggesting immovable granite. The conversation grew heated, she could tell by the way the stranger leaned forward, jabbing his finger toward Weston's chest without quite making contact. Then the stranger turned and strode toward her cabin. Eliza's hand went to the door bolt, ensuring it was secure, but the footsteps stopped at her small porch, followed by a knock that managed to sound both polite and demanding. Eliza, I know you're in there. We need to talk." The voice froze her blood. Thomas Hartley, the man who'd been her husband for exactly 6 days before declaring the marriage a mistake. The man who'd left her feeling broken and unwanted. The man who'd taken her innocence and then rejected her for the way she'd given it. "Go away." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Don't be childish. I've come a long way to find you." A pause. "You're my wife, Eliza. Whatever. Misunderstanding we had. It's time to come home. The marriage was annulled. You saw to that. A mistake. I was young, foolish. I've reconsidered." Through the side window, she could see Weston approaching, his expression dark as a thunderstorm. The 2 men with Thomas hired muscle, by the look of them, moved to intercept him. "Please leave," she called through the door. "I have nothing to say to you." "You're living in sin with another man. From what I hear, rather beneath you. Don't you think I'm offering to restore your reputation, to give you back the life you should have?" "The life I should have." Anger flared, hot and cleansing. "You mean the life where you told me I was cold as winter stone, where you said lying with me was like embracing a statue, that life?" Silence. Then, his voice lower, more dangerous. "I was drunk. I said things I didn't mean." "Drunk on your wedding night. How romantic." "Eliza, be reasonable. You think this rancher wants you, really wants you? He's just taking what's freely offered. When he's had his fill." The door behind Thomas exploded open, hitting the cabin wall with enough force to shake the windows. But it wasn't Thomas who'd opened it. Weston stood in the doorway, having somehow gotten past the hired men. His face was calm, terrifyingly calm, but his eyes held murder. "You need to leave," he said quietly. "Now." Thomas straightened, trying to reclaim authority. "This is between me and my wife." "Former wife, from what I hear, makes it none of your business anymore." "And what is it to you, her protector, her keeper?" Thomas's smile was ugly. "Or just enjoying the goods without the burden of marriage?" Weston moved so fast Eliza barely saw it. One moment Thomas was smirking. The next, he was pressed against the porch rail. Weston's hand twisted in his expensive shirt collar. "Listen, careful," Weston said, voice still deadly quiet. "You're going to walk back to your horse. You're going to ride out of here, And you're going to forget you ever knew where to find her. Because if I see you again, if I hear you've been asking about her, if you so much as send a letter, I'll make you regret it in ways that'll follow you back to whatever hole you crawled out of. You're threatening me I could have you arrested. Try it." Weston released him with a slight shove. "Sheriff's a friend of mine. Be interested to hear how you're harassing a woman who wants nothing to do with you." Thomas straightened his collar, trying to salvage dignity. His gaze found Eliza through the window. "This isn't over. You're still my wife in the eyes of God, whatever papers say, and you'll remember that when this arrangement falls apart, when you're used up and discarded again." "Get out!" Weston's voice had dropped even lower. Thomas gestured to his men, who'd apparently decided not to test the rancher further. As they mounted their horses, Thomas called out one last time, "I know what you are, Eliza, what you're not capable of. Don't think he won't figure it out too." Then they were gone, dust settling in their wake. Weston stood on her porch a moment longer, tension radiating from every line of his body. Then he turned to her door. "Eliza, you all right?" She opened it slowly, not trusting her voice. He took in her pale face, her shaking hands, and something shifted in his expression. "Come on," he said gently. "Let's get you some coffee, or something stronger, if you've a mind." She followed him to the main house on unsteady legs. He settled her in the kitchen chair she'd come to think of as hers, then busied himself at the stove. Neither spoke until he set a cup before her, coffee liberally laced with whiskey from the smell of it. "Drink," he ordered. "You look ready to faint." The first sip burned, but the second steadied her nerves. "How did you know to come?" "Saw him looking at your cabin like he owned it. Didn't care for the expression." He poured his own cup. Straight whiskey this time. "Ex-husband." "For 6 days." The words came out bitter. "Before he decided I wasn't suited for marriage." Weston was quiet for a long moment. Then, his loss. "You don't understand." The whiskey had loosened her tongue, or perhaps it was the aftermath of fear. "He was right. I'm not warm, not the way women are supposed to be. He said being with me was like trying to warm himself against stone." He said that. Something dangerous flickered in Weston's eyes again. "The morning after our wedding, before he left to arrange the annulment." She stared into her cup. "I've never told anyone that. Don't know why I'm telling you. Because poison needs drawing out sometimes. Keeping it in just lets it fester." She looked up at him then. This man who'd defended her without question, who'd never asked for explanations or justifications. "Why did you do that, threaten him?" "Because he had no right to come here, no right to speak to you that way." He paused. "And because the way you looked when you saw him, nobody should have the power to put that fear in another person's eyes." "I wasn't afraid, not exactly." "Know what then?" She considered the question, really considered it. "Ashamed, maybe, that he'd found me, that you'd hear that you'd know what I am. And what are you?" The question was gentle, genuinely curious rather than challenging. Eliza found herself answering honestly. "Broken, perhaps, missing something essential that other women have, the warmth that makes men want to stay." Weston set down his cup and leaned back in his chair, studying her with those dark eyes that seemed to see too much. "You know what I think?" She waited. "I think Thomas Hartley is a fool who mistook quiet strength for coldness, who expected you to be grateful for his attention instead of earning your trust, who blamed you for his own inadequacies as a husband and a man. You don't know. I know enough." His voice was firm but kind. "I've watched you these months. Eliza. Seen you with the barn cats, gentle as a mother. Seen you help Ruth Holcomb when her arthritis acts up. No payment expected. Watched you teach the Morrison girl to sew when she begged to learn. Patient as a saint with her clumsy fingers." He leaned forward slightly. "That's not coldness, that's care expressed quietly. Without fanfare. Some folks need grand gestures and constant chatter. Others appreciate the value of stillness, of presence without demands. Thomas Hartley wanted a performance. You gave him truth. His failure to recognize the gift says everything about him and nothing about you. Eliza felt tears prick her eyes. When had she last cried? Not since Chicago. She was certain. You make it sound simple. It is simple, just not easy. He stood, refilled her cup with plain coffee this time. He won't bother you again. I'll make sure of it. I can't ask you to. You're not asking, I'm offering. Same as the cabin, same as everything else. Free and clear, no obligations attached. She studied his face, searching again for the trap, the hidden cost. Found only steady resolve and something else, something warmer that he kept carefully controlled. Why? She asked again. Why do you care what happens to me? He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful, almost puzzled. First time I saw you, sitting on that train platform in the snow, you looked like you'd already given up, like the world had beaten you down and you were ready to let it win. But you got in my wagon anyway. Took the help offered even though it scared you. That took courage. He moved to the window, looking out toward her cabin. Then you stayed, worked hard, made a place for yourself, never complained or asked for more than was offered. And every day, I watched you get a little stronger, stand a little straighter, like watching something bloom after a hard winter. He turned back to her. I care because you're worth caring about, not for what you can give or how warm you are or any of that nonsense Hartley filled your head with. Just because you're you, and you deserve better than what you've been handed. The tears spilled over then, silent drops she didn't try to hide. Weston handed her a handkerchief without comment, then busied himself at the stove to give her privacy. I should go, she said finally. Let you get back to your work. Stay as long as you need. Door's always open. He paused at the kitchen doorway. Eliza, that letter I've been working on for the church committee, the one about allowing you to teach Sunday school, I'm sending it tomorrow. Town needs to see what I see, who you really are, not what gossip says. He left before she could respond, the front door closing quietly behind him. Eliza sat in the warm kitchen, holding a stranger's handkerchief and wondering how her carefully ordered world had shifted so completely. Thomas had found her, yes, had tried to drag her back into the shame and self-doubt she'd carried for 3 years. But Weston had stood between them, not just physically but emotionally, offering a different mirror in which to see herself. She thought of Thomas's parting words that Weston would figure out what she was, would discard her as Thomas had. Maybe that was true. Maybe this gentle care would evaporate when tested by intimacy. But for now, for today, she had been defended, valued, seen as worthy of protection and care. It was more than she'd had in years, more than she'd thought to have again. Rising on still shaky legs, Eliza washed the cups and tidied the kitchen's small acts of care she could offer in return for sanctuary. Then she walked back to her cabin, back straight despite the emotional storm of the afternoon. Through her window, she could see Weston in the corral, working with a young horse. His movements were patient, gentle, never forcing but always guiding, the same way he'd handled her. She realized, offering trust and waiting for it to be accepted, never pushing past what she was ready to give. Thomas was wrong about her. Weston had said simple words, firmly spoken, but they lodged in her chest like seeds in fertile ground. Maybe, just maybe, they could grow into something true. The sun hung low over Frontier Hollow's market square, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. It had been 2 weeks since Thomas's unwelcome visit. 2 weeks of Eliza constantly checking over her shoulder, expecting him to materialize from the shadows despite Weston's assurances. She was examining fabric at Patterson's outdoor display when she heard the familiar voice, not Thomas this time, but almost as unwelcome. Well, well, the mysterious Miss Hart, gracing us common folk with her presence. Eliza turned to find Samuel Morrison standing behind her, the man whose promises had brought her west in the first place. He looked much as his photograph had suggested: neat whiskers, decent clothes, pleasant enough features. But his eyes held something cold, calculating. "Mr. Morrison." She kept her voice neutral, turning back to the fabric. "Heard you landed on your feet right quick. Weston Cole's place, isn't it?" He moved closer, voice dropping. "Must say, I'm impressed. Most women would have gone crying back east. But not you. Found yourself a better prospect right off." "If you'll excuse me." His hand caught her elbow as she tried to leave. Now. No call to be unfriendly, just making conversation." "Release me!" Her voice came out steady despite the anxiety clawing at her throat. Public square, Miss Hart, just being neighborly. But his grip tightened slightly. "Funny thing, though, I wrote you all those letters, made all those plans, and you never once mentioned you'd been married before. Damaged goods, some might say." The words hit like a physical blow. "How did you—" "Thomas Hartley's been drinking at Murphy's Saloon. Amazing what a man will share after a few whiskeys." Samuel's smile was ugly. Cold as winter stone. He said, "Unnatural in the marriage bed. Makes a man wonder what Weston Cole sees in you. Though maybe he hasn't discovered your shortcomings yet." Eliza tried to pull away again, but Samuel held firm. Around them, the market bustled on, people carefully not noticing the drama unfolding. This was how it worked. She knew men could do almost anything in public if they kept their voices down and their smiles in place. "Let me tell you what's going to happen." Samuel continued conversationally. "You're going to reconsider my offer. Oh yes, I'm still willing to marry you, despite your used condition. Can't be too choosy out here. But the terms have changed. You'll be grateful, obedient, and very, very accommodating. None of this cold stone business, and in exchange, I won't share what Hartley told me with the whole town." "I'd rather freeze in the street." "Would you?" His grip shifted, thumb pressing into the soft inside of her elbow in a way that would leave bruises. "How about Weston Cole? Would he rather have his name dragged through the mud? People already whisper about him taking you in. What happens when they hear the details? How you can't perform a wife's duties properly. How you're so cold a man fled after one night." Eliza's vision blurred with tears of rage and humiliation. This was her nightmare, her shame weaponized. Used to cage her, she opened her mouth, though whether to scream or submit she wasn't sure. "There a problem here?" Weston's voice cut through her panic like a blade. He stood a few feet away, stance casual but eyes anything but. His gaze took in Samuel's grip on her arm, her pale face, the way she trembled despite her straight spine. Samuel released her, stepping back with false joviality. "Weston just catching up with Miss Hart. No harm done." "Didn't look like catching up from where I stood." Weston moved closer, positioning himself slightly between them. "Looked like harassment. Man can't talk to a woman in public now, though I suppose you'd be protective of your investment." Something shifted in Weston's expression, a darkening that made Samuel take another step back. But when he spoke, his voice remained level. "Miss Hart works for the Pattersons. Helps out Ruth Holcomb when needed. Teaches Sunday school starting next week. That's all the investment this town needs to know about." Sure. Samuel's smile turned sly. "Though folks might be interested to know." "Samuel?" Weston's voice dropped to a register Eliza had never heard before. "You got something to say. Say it to me, right here, right now. Otherwise, keep your mouth shut and your hands to yourself." The two men stared at each other, a silent battle of wills playing out in the fading daylight. Around them, the market had gone suspiciously quiet, people finding reasons to linger nearby. "Finally," Samuel laughed, though it sounded forced. "No need for dramatics. Cole was just offering Miss Hart my renewed interest, given her circumstances. But if you've got prior claim, I've got no claim on anybody." Weston's voice carried clearly across the square. But I've got strong opinions about men who corner women, grab them, threaten them. Real strong opinions. I never threatened. Whole square heard you threaten her. Morrison. This from Ruth Holcomb, who'd materialized from the crowd like an avenging angel. Clear as day. Something about spreading tales if she didn't accommodate you. That's blackmail where I come from. Murmurs rippled through the gathered crowd. Samuel's face flushed red as he realized how many witnesses had heard his words. You're all making too much of a simple conversation. He blustered. Simple conversation don't leave bruises. Ruth pointed to Eliza's arm, where the marks from his grip were already darkening. Sheriff might be interested in hearing about this simple conversation. Samuel's eyes darted between faces, finding no sympathy. This is ridiculous. She's nothing but a... Careful. Weston's warning cut him off. Real careful what you say next. For a moment, violence hung in the air like smoke. Then Samuel spat on the ground near Eliza's feet. Not worth the trouble anyway. Hartley was right cold as stone and twice as useless. He pushed through the crowd and stalked away, leaving silence in his wake. Eliza stood frozen, acutely aware of every eye upon her, the shame Thomas had cultivated, that Samuel had tried to weaponize, threatened to drown her. She wanted to run, to hide, to disappear entirely. Then Weston's hand touched her elbow, gentle where Samuel's had been cruel. Come on, let's get you home. I can't. Everyone heard, they'll all know. They know Samuel Morrison's a bully and a fool. Nothing more. He guided her through the crowd, Ruth Holcomb clearing a path with sharp looks at anyone who stared too long. Eliza moved mechanically, Weston's steady presence the only thing keeping her upright. The whispers followed them, but she couldn't make out words through the roaring in her ears. They were halfway to the wagon when a hand touched her shoulder. She flinched, but it was only Mrs. Patterson. The elderly shopkeeper's face creased with concern. You come by tomorrow as usual, the woman said firmly. Got a new shipment of silk needs sorting, and Lord knows I can't trust anyone else with it. Mrs. Patterson, Tomorrow as usual, the woman repeated. And if anyone gives you trouble, you send them to me. I've got a few things to say about men who threaten decent women. Others stepped forward then, offering quiet words of support. The preacher's wife mentioned the Sunday school position was still hers if she wanted it. The blacksmith's daughter shyly asked if Eliza might have time to help with her wedding dress. Small gestures. But they formed a wall between Eliza and the shame threatening to consume her. By the time they reached the wagon, tears were streaming down her face, not from hurt, but from overwhelming gratitude. Weston helped her up, then surprised her by climbing in beside her rather than taking the driver's seat. Ruth, you mind driving? My hands aren't quite steady enough just now. Ruth Holcomb snorted. Been wanting to handle this team for months. She hauled herself up with surprising agility. Though I'd wager your hands are plenty steady. Just might use them for something you'd regret if you drove past Morrison's place. Weston didn't deny it. He sat beside Eliza as Ruth drove them home, not touching but close enough that she could feel his warmth. Neither spoke until they were well out of town. I'm sorry, Eliza whispered finally. For what? For causing a scene? For Samuel knowing about Thomas and... She couldn't finish. You've got nothing to apologize for. Nothing. His voice was fierce. Morrison's actions are on him. Hartley's words are on him. None of it's on you. But what he said, what everyone heard a bitter man trying to hurt a woman who rejected him. That's all. He turned to look at her directly. Eliza, I need you to hear this. Really hear it. Whatever happened between you and Hartley, however he made you feel about yourself, that's his failing, not yours. A real man doesn't blame a woman for his own inadequacies, doesn't spread tales to save his pride. You don't understand. I am cold. I couldn't... When we were together, I couldn't respond the way he expected, the way wives are supposed to. Stop. The word was gentle but firm. You were young. scared, with a stranger who clearly cared more about his own satisfaction than your comfort. That's not coldness, that's sense. Ruth spoke over her shoulder. Girl, I've been married 32 years. Let me tell you something about wedding nights and what comes after. Takes trust to warm to a man's touch. Takes gentleness to build that trust. Takes patience to learn each other's ways. Any fool who expects a frightened virgin to respond like an experienced woman ain't worth the paper his name's written on. The frank words made Eliza blush, but they also eased something in her chest. He said I was unnatural. He was a selfish boy who didn't know the first thing about being a husband, Ruth said flatly. Probably still is. You're well rid of him. They reached the ranch as full dark settled. Ruth handed the reins to Weston with a meaningful look. I'll be by tomorrow to check on you, she told Eliza. Got a new quilt pattern might interest you. After she left, Weston walked Eliza to her cabin. At the door, he stopped, seeming to wrestle with words. What Morrison threatened spreading tales, trying to force you if he or anyone tries that again. You tell me, immediately. I can't keep depending on you to fight my battles. You're not depending. You're accepting help when threatened. There's a difference. He studied her face in the lamplight from her window. You've been fighting alone so long you've forgotten that some battles aren't meant to be solo endeavors. Sometimes standing together is the only way to win. Why do you care so much? The question escaped before she could stop it. Everyone else sees damaged goods. Why don't you? He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. Maybe because I see a woman who survived betrayal without becoming bitter, who works hard without complaint, who teaches children and helps neighbors and brings beauty into the world with her needle and thread. If that's damaged goods, then the world's definition needs changing. He touched his hat and turned to go, then paused. That gray kitten's about weaned. Might bring him by tomorrow if you're still interested. The ordinary offer after such an extraordinary day made her laugh a watery sound but genuine. I'm interested. Good. Cabin could use some life in it besides just you. After he left, Eliza sat on her bed, trying to process the day's events. Samuel's threats, the town's response, Weston's fierce protection, Ruth's blunt wisdom, it all swirled together into something she couldn't quite name. For 3 years, she'd carried Thomas's rejection like a brand, letting it define her worth. Samuel had tried to use that shame as a weapon, but instead of destroying her, his public cruelty had revealed something unexpected. She wasn't alone anymore. The town had stood with her. Women who barely knew her had offered support, and Weston had once again placed himself between her and harm, asking nothing in return. Through her window, she could see lights in the main house. Was he reading working on ranch accounts, or was he, like her, replaying the day's events and wondering what came next? She thought about his words, how standing together was sometimes the only way to win. For so long, she'd believed standing alone was the only way to stay safe. But maybe safety wasn't worth the isolation. Maybe the risk of trusting others was worth taking if it meant moments like today, when the world proved kinder than she'd dared hope. Tomorrow she would face the town again. There would be whispers, speculation, side glances, but there would also be misses, Patterson's silk to sort, Ruth's quilt pattern to admire, and Sunday school lessons to plan. And somewhere in between, a gray kitten to welcome home. It wasn't the life she'd planned when she stepped off that train 4 months ago, but perhaps it was the life she needed, one built not on grand promises, but on small kindnesses, quiet strength, and the radical act of accepting help when offered. One built on the revolutionary idea that she might be worth defending, worth supporting, worth knowing. Just as she was. The evening had settled into Frontier Hollow like a blanket, soft and encompassing. Eliza sat before the fire in her cabin, the gray kitten whom she'd named Ash purring in her lap as she worked on hemming a dress. The events at the market square 3 days ago still echoed in her mind, but the town's response had surprised her. Instead of scandal, she'd found support, instead of isolation. Community. A knock at her door made Ash leap down with an indignant mew. Eliza set aside her sewing, surprised by a visitor at this hour. Through the window, she could see Weston's familiar silhouette in the porch light. "Come in," she called, remaining seated. They'd developed an easier rhythm these past days. Though still careful of boundaries, he entered, bringing the scent of wood smoke and evening air. In his hands was a steaming mug. "Thought you might like some tea. Ruth brought over a new blend chamomile and something else. Says it helps with sleep." "I've been sleeping fine," she said, though they both knew it wasn't entirely true. The lamp still burned late in her cabin most nights. Well, no harm in trying it. He set the mug on the small table beside her chair, then retreated to lean against the door frame close enough for conversation, far enough for propriety. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. The only sounds, the fire's crackle and Ash's exploratory sniffing around Weston's boots. "Wanted to tell you," he said eventually. "Samuel Morrison left town this morning. Took the early stage to Denver. Word is he won't be coming back." Relief flooded through her, though she tried not to show it too plainly. "That's good to hear." "Also wanted to ask, there's a barn dance Saturday week. Nothing fancy, just neighbors gathering, music, food, that sort of thing." He studied his hands. "Thought you might want to go." Eliza's needle stilled. "Are you asking me to accompany you?" "I'm asking if you'd like to go. I'll be there either way. Host can't exactly skip his own barn dance." A slight smile touched his lips. "But if you wanted company for the evening, I'd be glad to provide it." The invitation hung between them, weighted with more than its simple words. In the months since she'd arrived, they'd existed in careful parallel, close but never touching, supportive but never presuming. This felt like a shift, subtle but significant. I should tell you something first." She set down her sewing, fingers twisting in her lap. "About what Samuel said, about Thomas. You don't owe me explanations. Eliza." "No, but I need to." She drew a breath, gathering courage. "When Thomas and I, on our wedding night, I didn't know what to expect. My mother died when I was young. I had no sisters, no one to tell me." She paused, choosing words carefully. "He'd been drinking at the reception, heavily. When we retired, he was impatient, rough. I was frightened, and it showed. I couldn't respond the way he wanted. Couldn't pretend enthusiasm I didn't feel." Weston remained silent, his expression carefully neutral. "Afterward, he was angry. Said I was cold, unnatural, that trying to warm himself with me was like embracing stone." The words still hurt, even now. "In the morning, he could barely look at me. By noon, he'd gone to arrange the annulment, claiming the marriage was never consummated. A lie. But one I didn't contest because the truth seemed worse somehow." "Eliza." "I need to finish." She met his eyes, needing him to understand. "I thought he must be right, that I was somehow made wrong, lacking whatever warmth other women possess. It's why I answered Samuel's advertisement. I thought maybe with advance warning, with letters and understanding, it might be different. But then he never showed. And I thought that was my answer, that even the promise of me was too cold to follow through on." She stood abruptly, moving to the window. "So when you ask me to a dance, I need you to understand I may never be warm the way men expect. I care for you, Weston, more than I should, but I can't promise to be anything other than what I am." The silence stretched so long she wondered if he'd left. Then she heard him move, his footsteps crossing the small space. He didn't touch her, just stood close enough that she could feel his presence. "You know what I think?" His voice was low, thoughtful. "I think Thomas Hartley was a selfish boy who mistook his own failures for yours. Any man who approaches his wedding night drunk, who treats his bride rough, who expects her to respond with joy to thoughtlessness that man knows nothing about warmth or women or worth." She turned slightly, able to see his profile in the lamplight. Real warmth isn't about what happens in a marriage bed. Eliza, it's in the way you gentle that kitten, the way you taught the Morrison girl to sew, patient with every mistake, the way you sit with Ruth when her joints ache, reading to her from those novels she pretends not to love. That's warmth. That's what matters. But if someone wanted more, then that someone would need to earn it, with patience and gentleness and time, with respect for what you've been through and who you are. He turned to face her fully. I'm not asking you to the dance expecting anything but the pleasure of your company. No obligations, no assumptions, just two people who might enjoy an evening of music and friendly faces. And if people talk, they already whisper about us. Let them whisper. They'll do it whether we dance or not. His lips quirked slightly. Besides, Ruth Holcomb's threatened to take her rolling pin to anyone who speaks ill of you. The woman's got impressive aim. Despite everything, Eliza found herself smiling. She is rather protective. Good people recognize good people. Simple as that. He moved toward the door, then paused. Think about the dance. No pressure to decide tonight. And Eliza, thank you for trusting me with your truth. I know that wasn't easy. After he left, Eliza returned to her chair, but the sewing lay forgotten. Ash climbed back into her lap, purring as she stroked his soft fur. The tea was still warm, its gentle fragrance filling the space. She thought about warmth, Thomas's definition versus Weston's. One demanded performance, the other recognized quiet acts of care. One took what it wanted, the other waited to be given. One left her feeling broken, the other made her feel whole. Through the window, she could see the main house, its windows glowing softly. She pictured Weston there, perhaps reading by the fire, perhaps simply sitting and thinking as she was. He'd listened to her shame without judgment, had reframed her supposed coldness as something entirely different, had offered companionship without conditions. The next evening, she found herself at the main house for supper, a weekly tradition that had developed naturally. As she helped clear the dishes, she spoke casually, as if the words weren't momentous. About the barn dance, I'd like to go with you if the offer stands. Weston's hands stilled on the plate he was drying. Then he smiled a real smile that transformed his usually serious features. It stands. That was all. No grand declarations, no pressure for more. Just acceptance, simple and clean. The following days passed in preparation. The barn needed clearing, lanterns hung, tables arranged. Eliza found herself drawn into the planning, Ruth Holcomb commandeering her help with food preparation. It felt good to be included, to be part of something larger than her own careful existence. The night before the dance, she couldn't sleep. Old anxieties surfaced. What if she froze when he tried to dance with her? What if her body betrayed her again with its supposed coldness? What if Thomas had been right all along? A soft knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts. She opened the door to find Weston holding a package wrapped in brown paper. Couldn't sleep either, he admitted. Thought you might want this for tomorrow. No obligation to wear it, just saw it in town and thought of you. Inside was a shawl. Soft wool dyed the deep blue of evening sky. Simple but beautiful. Elegant without being ostentatious. Perfect. Weston, I can't. It's a gift for putting up with my barn full of neighbors tomorrow. He shifted, almost shy. Also wanted to say tomorrow's just a dance. Nothing you're not comfortable with. If you want to leave early, we leave. If you don't want to dance at all, we don't. Your choice. Always. Something cracked in her chest, not breaking but opening. What did I do to deserve such consideration? Nothing you did, just who you are. He touched his hat. Get some sleep if you can. Tomorrow will be good, I promise. She watched him walk back to the main house, the shawl soft in her hands. Tomorrow she would wear it to her first dance in over 3 years, would stand beside a man who saw her truly and found her worthwhile, would perhaps even dance, if the moment felt right. In her cabin, Ash curled against her side as she finally drifted towards sleep. Through the window, stars wheeled overhead, constant and bright. She thought about Thomas, probably in some Chicago boarding house, still blaming others for his own inadequacies. About Samuel, fleeing to Denver rather than face the consequences of his actions. And about Weston, who offered gifts without strings and promised that tomorrow would be good. For the first time in 3 years, she believed him, believed that maybe, just maybe, she could step into an evening of music and laughter without the weight of shame dragging her down. That she could be held without freezing, touched without fear, seen without judgment. It wouldn't erase the past. Nothing could do that. But perhaps it could write a different future, one where warmth wasn't demanded but cultivated, where touch was gentle and patient, where a woman who'd been called cold as stone could discover her own quiet fire. The shawl lay folded beside her bed, a promise of tomorrow's possibilities. And for tonight, that was enough. In the morning, she would rise and face whatever came, but first, she would rest in the knowledge that she was wanted not for what she could provide or perform, but simply for herself. Eliza Hart, seamstress, neighbor, woman finding her way back to wholeness one careful step at a time. The dance awaited, and for the first time in memory, so did hope. The barn dance had ended hours ago, the last wagon disappearing into the darkness, leaving behind only the lingering scent of lamp oil and the memory of music. Eliza sat on her cabin porch, still wearing the blue shawl, unable to quite let go of the evening just yet. It had been magical in its ordinariness. Neighbors gathering, children darting between dancers, fiddle music filling the air with joy, and Weston, always nearby but never pressing, letting her set the pace of their interaction. They'd danced twice simple country dances that required little more than moving in time and changing partners occasionally. His hand at her waist had been light, respectful, warm without demanding anything in return. Now she pulled the shawl tighter, remembering, not just the dancing, but the 100 small moments that made up the evening. How he'd noticed when the crowd grew too thick and guided her outside for air. The way he'd smiled when the Morrison girl ran up to show off the embroidery Eliza had taught her. His quiet pride when introducing her to neighbors from farther out. "This is Miss Hart, the seamstress I told you about, best in the territory." A movement in the darkness caught her eye. Weston emerged from the barn, probably finishing the last of the cleanup. He noticed her on the porch and changed direction, stopping a respectful distance away. "Thought you'd be asleep by now," he said. "Too wound up. I suppose it was a lovely evening." "You seem to enjoy yourself. I'm glad." He shifted, lamplight from her window catching the planes of his face. "Actually, I'm glad you're awake. Been meaning to ask you something." Eliza waited, noting the unusual uncertainty in his manner. "Next month there's a cattlemen's meeting in Cedar Ridge. 3 days, mostly business. But they have a social on the last night, proper hotel, restaurants, that sort of thing." He paused. "Wondered if you might want to come along. Separate rooms, of course. Just thought you might enjoy seeing somewhere beyond Frontier Hollow." The invitation was unexpected. Travel together, even with careful propriety, would set tongues wagging furiously. But looking at him standing there in the darkness, careful and hopeful, she found she didn't care. "I'd need to arrange time away from the store. Already spoke to Martha Patterson. She said she could spare you if you finished the Morrison wedding dress first." Eliza smiled at his presumption. "Rather confident. Weren't you?" "Hopeful," he corrected. "There's a difference." The next weeks flew by in preparation. Eliza threw herself into the Morrison dress, a creation of ivory silk and delicate lace that would be the finest gown Frontier Hollow had seen, between seams. She found herself daydreaming about Cedar Ridge, a real town with real shops, restaurants with printed menus, a hotel with running water. But more than that. She thought about 3 days in Weston's company, meals shared, conversations extended beyond their usual brief exchanges. the possibility of knowing him better. Ruth Holcomb cornered her the day before departure. "You got your head on straight about this trip?" "I don't know what you mean." "Girl, I've got eyes. That man looks at you like you hung the moon, and you watch him when you think nobody's noticing." Ruth's expression softened. "Just remember, Weston Cole's been alone a long time. He's not one to play at feelings. If you're not sure, don't give him hope." Eliza's hand stilled on the dress she was packing. "And if I am sure, then stop dancing around each other and see what happens. Life's too short and too hard to waste chances at happiness." Ruth squeezed her shoulder. "Just be careful with each other. You've both got tender places." The journey to Cedar Ridge took most of a day. The stagecoach bouncing over rutted roads. Weston had insisted on purchasing her ticket, waving away her protests with logic about business expenses. They talked more in those hours than they had in months about books, about the ranch, about her growing reputation as a seamstress. "Been thinking," he said as the town came into view. "You might consider expanding, taking on an apprentice, maybe building toward your own shop someday. In Frontier Hollow. Why not? Towns growing, railroads coming through next year, might be opportunities for someone with skill and ambition." The idea planted itself in her mind as they checked into the hotel, a modest but clean establishment, where the clerk showed no surprise at their request for separate rooms. Eliza had never considered putting down permanent roots, had always seen Frontier Hollow as a temporary refuge, but maybe. That evening, she emerged from her room wearing her best dress, a deep green wool she'd remade from a customer's cast-off, fitted perfectly to her own form. Weston waited in the lobby, dressed in what must be his town clothes, black coat, string tie, boots polished to a shine. He looked handsome and uncomfortable in equal measure. "You clean up well," she said, trying to ease his obvious discomfort. "Feel like a dressed-up scarecrow." But he smiled, offering his arm. "You look beautiful." The simple compliment, delivered without flourish, warmed her more than elaborate praise might have. They dined at the hotel restaurant, watching the bustle of a larger town through tall windows. Conversation came easier now, as if the change of setting had loosened some invisible restraint. "Can I ask you something?" Eliza set down her fork, gathering courage. "Why did you really invite me here?" Weston considered the question, turning his water glass slowly. "Been asking myself the same thing. Think maybe I'm tired of being careful all the time, of keeping everything at arm's length, including me." "Especially you." He met her eyes. "That first night, when I found you at the station, you looked how I felt for years after my father died. Lost, angry, ready to give up but too stubborn to quit. I recognized it. You never talk about your family." "Not much to say. Mother died when I was 12, father when I was 20. Sold everything back east, came west to start over. Built the ranch from nothing, kept my head down, worked hard." He paused. "Somewhere along the way, being alone stopped being temporary and started being who I was." "What changed?" "You showed up half frozen on a train platform." His smile was self-deprecating. "Suddenly the house felt too quiet. Started looking forward to morning coffee because you might be there. Caught myself making improvements to the cabin, thinking about what would make you comfortable." "Weston." "I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly. "Just trying to be honest. You wanted to know why I invited you, and the truth is, I wanted more time, to talk without the whole town watching, to see if this feeling I have is real or just loneliness playing tricks." Eliza reached across the table, touching his hand lightly. "And what have you decided?" He turned his palm up, fingers closing gently around hers. "That it's real. That you're the first person in 6 years who makes me want to try again. But I also know you've been hurt. That trust comes hard. So I'm willing to wait, to go slow, to be whatever you need me to be. And if I need you to be more than my landlord and protector." His fingers tightened slightly. "Then we figure out what that looks like. Together." They walked back to the hotel slowly, her hand tucked into his arm. At her door, he paused, seeming to wrestle with himself. Then, deliberately gentle, he lifted her hand and pressed his lips to her knuckles. "Good night, Eliza." She caught his sleeve as he turned to go. "Wait." He faced her, patient as always. She rose on her toes, pressed a kiss to his cheek, soft, brief, but intentional. "Good night, Weston." The next day was business meetings about cattle prices, grazing rights, the coming railroad. Eliza explored the town, purchasing thread and notions not available in Frontier Hollow, window shopping at stores that sold ready-made dresses and fancy hats. But her mind kept returning to the previous evening, to admissions made and possibilities acknowledged. That night was the Cattlemen's Social, a proper dance with a hired orchestra and printed dance cards. Eliza wore the green dress again, but with her hair arranged more elaborately and her grandmother's pearl ear-ups, saved for special occasions. The ballroom was grander than anything in Frontier Hollow, with polished floors and crystal chandeliers. Weston looked almost panicked at the formality, but he let her in gamely, introducing her to business associates with quiet pride. "May I have this dance?" A younger man appeared at her elbow during the third set, handsome, polished, with the air of money about him. "James Thornton, from Denver. I don't believe we've been introduced." Weston had been pulled into a discussion about water rights. Eliza hesitated, then accepted. It was just a dance, after all. But Thornton held her too close, smiled too knowingly, asked too many personal questions. Where was she from? Was she married? What was her relationship with Cole? "We're friends," she said firmly, trying to maintain proper distance. "Friends." His smile was condescending. "How modern, though a woman like you could do better than a small-time rancher. I have business interests throughout the territory. Could use a beautiful hostess for social occasions. I'm quite content with my current situation. Are you?" His hand slid lower on her back, improper and presumptuous. "Think about it. I'm staying at the Grand Hotel. Room 237. The music ended. Eliza pulled away immediately, but not before she saw Weston watching from across the room, his expression dark. She made her way to him, Thornton's chuckle following her. "I'd like to leave," she said quietly. He didn't ask questions, just collected their things and escorted her out. They walked in silence until they reached the hotel. Then he spoke, voice carefully controlled. "Did he upset you?" "He was inappropriate. Nothing I haven't handled before." "That's not what I asked." She stopped walking, turning to face him in the gaslight. "Are you angry?" "Not at you, but angry." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd learned meant he was struggling for words. "I watched him hold you, saw him try to charm you, and I wanted to—" He stopped, shook his head. "I have no right to feel possessive. We haven't— I'm not your—" "Aren't you—" The question hung between them. Slowly, deliberately, Eliza stepped closer. "You're not my husband. No, not my fiancé, but you're something, Weston, something important. And if you wanted to be more—" "Eliza," her name was almost a groan. "You don't know what you're offering." "Don't I?" She placed her hand on his chest, feeling his heart race beneath her palm. "I'm offering to try, to see if what's between us is strong enough to overcome my fears and your solitude, to build something real, something lasting. And if I hurt you, if I'm clumsy or impatient or—" "You won't be—" The certainty in her voice surprised them both. "You've shown me for months who you are. Patient, kind, respectful. You're nothing like Thomas, nothing like what I feared." He covered her hand with his, holding it against his heart. "I want to court you properly, take you to dinners, bring you flowers, all of it, but back home, with everyone watching and talking." "Let them watch, let them talk." She smiled up at him. "I've been the subject of gossip since I arrived. At least now it'll be true." He kissed her then, there on the street with the gaslight haloing them in gold. Gentle, reverent, asking nothing but offering everything. When they parted, both breathing unsteadily, he touched her face with wondering fingers. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure I want to try." "That's enough for now." They returned to Frontier Hollow the next day, sitting closer in the stage, hands clasped between them when no other passengers were looking. The familiar landscape rolled past, but everything had changed. The careful distance they'd maintained was gone, replaced by something tender and new and terrifying in its possibility. At the ranch, he helped her down from the coach, hands lingering at her waist. "Have dinner with me tomorrow. A proper courting dinner." "I'd like that." She floated to her cabin, Ash greeting her with indignant meows about her absence. As she unpacked, she found herself humming the waltz from the social, the one they'd never gotten to dance because Thornton had interrupted. Through her window, she could see Weston carrying her purchases to the porch, careful with the packages. He looked up, caught her watching, and smiled a real, unguarded smile that transformed his face. For so long, she'd believed herself incapable of warmth, of the feelings that came naturally to other women. But watching him walk back to the main house, remembering his kiss and his patience and his promise to court her properly, she felt a flame kindling in her chest. Not the desperate heat Thomas had demanded, nor the calculated passion men like Thornton expected. Something quieter but no less real. A steady warmth that promised to grow with tending, to last through seasons, to warm two solitary souls who'd found in each other the possibility of home. Tomorrow would bring dinner and conversation and perhaps another kiss. Next week would bring gossip and speculation and Ruth Holcomb's knowing looks. The future would bring challenges she couldn't yet imagine. But tonight, Eliza Hart sat in her little cabin and let herself feel the full weight of hope. She was cared for. She was choosing to care in return. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to build a life on. The gray kitten curled in her lap, purring. Through the window, lamplight glowed in the main house, and in her chest, that small, steady flame burned on. Snow fell softly outside the cabin window, the first storm of another winter approaching. But inside, warmed by the stove and the quilt she was finishing, Eliza felt none of the cold dread that had marked her arrival in Frontier Hollow nearly a year ago. So much had changed since that desperate night on the train platform. The courtship with Weston had progressed slowly, sweetly, like honey poured on a winter morning. Dinners shared, walks taken, hands held when they thought no one was looking. The town had talked, of course. But the gossip held more curiosity than malice now. Even Mrs. Clearwater had grudgingly admitted they made a handsome couple. But tonight felt different, heavier somehow, charged with unspoken words. She'd been restless all day, unable to focus on her sewing. The Morrison wedding dress had been delivered months ago to great acclaim, bringing her more business than she could handle alone. She'd taken on young Sarah Mills as an apprentice, teaching her the careful stitches that could transform plain cloth into beauty. The shop Weston had envisioned was becoming reality. A knock interrupted her thoughts, not Weston's usual firm rap, but something more hesitant. She opened the door to find him standing in the falling snow, no coat despite the cold, looking more uncertain than she'd ever seen him. "Weston, what's wrong?" "Nothing. Everything." He ran a hand through his snow-dampened hair. "Can I come in?" She stepped aside, concerned by his agitation. He entered but didn't sit, pacing the small space like a caged mountain cat. Ash watched from his perch on the bed, tail twitching at the unusual energy. "I've been thinking," he began, then stopped, started again. "About us, about what we're doing." Ice formed in Eliza's stomach. "If you've changed your mind." "No." The word came out sharp, desperate. "No, that's not. I'm doing this badly." He finally stopped pacing, facing her with an expression of mingled frustration and yearning. I can't keep doing this, Eliza. These careful dinners, these proper walks, these chaste good-night kisses at your door. I thought you wanted to court me properly. I do. But it's been 8 months, and I'm going half mad with wanting more. He stepped closer, and she could see the struggle in his eyes. I lie awake knowing you're 50 yards away. I watch you teaching Sarah, patient and kind, and think about what you'd be like with our children. I see you at church, at the store, everywhere, and have to keep my hands to myself when all I want is to... He cut himself off, jaw clenched. What do you want? Her voice came out whisper soft. Everything. The word emerged raw, honest. I want to marry you, Eliza. Want to wake up beside you, build a life with you, give you my name and my home and whatever future we can make together. But I need to know if you want that too, or if I'm pushing too hard, too fast. She moved to the window, needing distance to think. Outside, the snow continued its gentle fall, blanketing the world in pristine white, a clean slate. She thought, a chance to write a different story. That night, she said quietly, my first night with Thomas. I've never told you all of it. You don't have to. I do. She turned to face him. He was rough, impatient. It hurt, but worse than the physical pain was how empty I felt after, how used. Like I'd given something precious and received nothing in return but criticism. She wrapped her arms around herself. I don't want to feel that way again. Weston crossed to her in 2 strides, gently taking her hands. Look at me. She met his eyes, finding them dark with emotion. What happened with Thomas that wasn't about you lacking anything? That was about him failing as a husband, as a man, as a human being. His thumbs rubbed gentle circles on her palms. If you do me the honor of becoming my wife, I promise you'll never feel used, never feel empty, never doubt that you're cherished. How can you promise that? Because I've spent a year learning you. Eliza Hart, I know you like your tea with honey but your coffee black. Know you hum when you're content and go silent when you're troubled. Know you're kind to creatures smaller than yourself and fierce in defending those you care about. His voice dropped lower. Know that when you trust someone enough to let them close, you give everything you have. Tears blurred her vision. I'm scared. I know. So am I. He released one hand to cup her face gently. But maybe we can be scared together. Maybe that's better than being safe alone. She leaned into his touch, feeling walls crumble that she'd thought permanent. Ask me again. Eliza Hart, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life showing you how a man should cherish the woman he loves? Yes. The word hung between them, simple and momentous. Then he was kissing her, different from their careful courtship kisses, deeper, hungrier, full of promise and relief. When they parted, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. When? Soon. I don't want to wait for spring. She surprised herself with the certainty. Next week, if Reverend Morrison can manage it. Next week it is. He kissed her again, softer this time. I should go. Let you rest. Tomorrow we'll tell everyone. Make plans. But at the door, he paused. Eliza, that night, when it happens, our first night, it won't be like before, I swear to you. After he left, she sat by the window watching his footprints fill with snow. In a week, she'd be Mrs. Weston Cole, would move from this little cabin to the main house, would share his bed, his life, his future. The old fear was still there, coiled in her belly like a snake. What if Thomas had been right? What if she couldn't respond the way Weston deserved? What if? No. She forced the thoughts away. Weston had proven himself for a year, patient with her fears, respectful of her boundaries, gentle in all his dealings. He was nothing like Thomas, nothing like any man she'd known. And she was nothing like the frightened girl who'd fled Chicago. She was established now, valued for her skills, surrounded by friends who'd defend her. She was choosing this, not being cornered into it by desperation or false promises. The week passed in a whirlwind. Ruth Holcomb took charge of preparations with military efficiency. Sarah Mills worked overtime to finish Eliza's wedding dress simple but elegant. Cream wool with delicate embroidery at the cuffs and collar. The church was cleaned and decorated with winter greenery and white ribbons. The night before the wedding, Ruth cornered her for what she called a woman's talk. "Now, I know that Hartley boy did you wrong," the older woman said bluntly. "But you need to understand what happens between a husband and wife. When it's done right, it's nothing to fear. It's a gift you give each other, a way of saying with your body what words can't capture." Eliza blushed but didn't look away. "What if I can't? What if I'm still too—" "Cold, ba." Ruth waved dismissively. "You're not cold. Girl, you're careful. There's a difference. And Weston's man enough to know that careful women need gentle handling until they learn they're safe." She patted Eliza's hand. "Trust him. Trust yourself. The rest will follow." The wedding day dawned clear and bright, snow sparkling like diamonds in the morning sun. The church was full. All of Frontier Hollow had turned out to see their mysterious seamstress marry their solitary rancher. Eliza stood at the back, Sarah fussing with her veil, and felt a moment of pure panic. Then the doors opened, and she saw Weston waiting at the altar. He wore a new black suit, hair carefully combed, but it was his expression that caught her. Wonder, joy, and something deeper a promise made before words were spoken. Her fear evaporated like morning mist. She walked down the aisle on Reverend Morrison's arm he'd insisted, claiming paternal privilege. But her eyes never left Weston's. When he took her hands, they were steady and warm. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Morrison began. But Eliza barely heard the words. She was lost in Weston's eyes, in the smile that played at his lips, in the gentle pressure of his fingers around hers. When it came time for vows, Weston spoke clearly. Each word a promise. "I, Weston, take you, Eliza, to be my wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." Her own vows came out whispered but certain. She meant every word. "You may kiss your bride." This kiss was different again, public, but somehow private, a seal on promises made. The church erupted in cheers, but Eliza heard only Weston's whispered, "Mrs. Cole," against her lips. The reception was held in the same barn where they'd danced months ago. Food appeared as if by magic. Ruth's doing, and musicians played. Eliza danced with her husband, feeling as if she floated above the floor. "Happy?" he asked during a slower tune, holding her close but not improperly. "Terrified," she admitted, "but yes, happy." "Me too, both parts." He spun her gently. "We don't have to, tonight. I mean, we can take our time. There's no rush." She looked up at him, this man who'd waited a year, who was willing to wait longer, who put her comfort above his own desires. And something shifted in her chest, ice cracking to reveal warmth beneath. "I don't want to wait," she said quietly. "I want to be your wife in all ways. I want to stop being afraid." His arms tightened fractionally. "Then we'll go slow as you need. And if you need to stop, we stop. No questions, no anger, no blame. Promise." As the evening wound down and they prepared to leave, friends and neighbors called out good wishes and gentle teasing. Eliza felt her cheeks burn, but also felt protected, surrounded by people who wished them well. The main house was warm and welcoming, but different now. This was her home too. Weston led her upstairs to what would be their bedroom, then paused at the door. "I'll give you time to— that is, I'll be downstairs when you're ready. No rush." She caught his hand as he turned to go. "Stay." "Eliza." "Please, I don't want to be alone with my fears. I want to face this together, like you said." He studied her face, then nodded slowly. "Together. Then, what followed was nothing like her wedding night with Thomas. Weston was endlessly patient, endlessly gentle. He asked before each touch, waited for her nod before proceeding. When she tensed, he stopped. When old memories threatened, he whispered reassurances. When she finally relaxed enough to trust, to feel, to respond, he treated it like the gift it was, later held safe in his arms. Eliza found herself crying not from pain or fear, but from overwhelming relief. She wasn't cold, she wasn't broken. She'd simply needed someone who understood that trust came before passion, that gentleness could unlock what force never could. "Thank you," she whispered against his chest. "For what?" "For seeing who I could be, not just who I was. For waiting. For making me believe I was worth waiting for." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "You're worth everything, Eliza Cole. Never doubt that." Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in fresh possibility. Inside, two people who'd thought themselves too damaged for love discovered that broken things, when carefully tended, could sometimes grow back stronger than before. It was a beginning, their beginning, and for the first time in her life, Eliza truly believed that she deserved every bit of happiness it might bring. Spring had come to Frontier Hollow once more, painting the valley in shades of green and gold. Eliza stood at the bedroom window, one hand resting on her growing belly, watching Weston work with the new colts in the corral. 3 years of marriage had only deepened what they'd found together, each season bringing new understanding, new depths to explore. The fear that had haunted her for so long had gradually faded, replaced by a quiet confidence. She was loved, she was cherished, and soon she would be a mother. A soft mew drew her attention. Ash, no longer a kitten but a dignified tomcat, rubbed against her ankles. She bent carefully to stroke his fur, remembering that first gray ball of fluff Weston had brought her. So much had changed since then. Mrs. Cole. Sarah Mills appeared in the doorway, now a skilled seamstress in her own right. "Mrs. Patterson sent word about the new fabric shipment. Should I go examine it?" "Please do, and Sarah choose something special for the baby clothes. Something soft." The girl's face lit up. The entire town had been celebrating since Eliza's condition became apparent, after 3 years of marriage. Some had begun to whisper, but Eliza had learned to ignore whispers. Good things came in their own time. She made her way downstairs, moving carefully. The house had become truly hers over the years, curtains she'd sewn gracing the windows, quilts she'd made warming the beds. The kitchen arranged exactly as she preferred, but more than the physical changes, it was the feeling of home that mattered, the sense of belonging she'd never expected to find. Weston entered through the back door, brushing dust from his clothes. His face brightened when he saw her, as it always did. 3 years, and he still looked at her like she'd hung the stars. "How are my 2 favorite people?" He crossed to her, one hand gentle on her belly. "Active. I think this one's going to be a rider like their father. Or a seamstress like their mother. Those little kicks could be practicing needlework." She laughed, leaning into his embrace. He smelled of sunshine and hay, of honest work and home. "Ruth's coming for supper. She threatened to teach me her secret dumpling recipe if I promised to name the baby after her." "Ruth Cole does have a ring to it," he teased. "Though I was partial to trouble if it's a boy, given how much you caused me." "I caused you trouble?" He nuzzled her neck, showing up half-frozen, making me care about something besides cattle, disrupting my perfectly ordered solitary life. "Such hardship," she murmured, tilting her head to give him better access. "The worst," he agreed, then grew serious. "Eliza, there's something I want to tell you, need to tell you." She pulled back to study his face. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Everything's right. That's what I—" He took a breath. "Do you know what today is?" She thought, "April 20th. 4 years ago today, you stepped off that train. 4 years ago, I found you on that platform and my life changed forever. Eliza's throat tightened with emotion. She'd been so focused on the future, the baby, the shop's expansion, the life they were building, she'd almost forgotten that desperate beginning. "You saved me that night," she said softly. "We saved each other." He cupped her face gently. "I need you to know something. These years with you, they've been the best of my life. Every morning I wake up grateful you took a chance on a lonely rancher who didn't know how to say what he felt." "Weston, let me finish." His thumbs stroked her cheeks. "That first night, our first real night together after the wedding, you thanked me. Remember, for seeing who you could be. But Eliza, you've become so much more than I ever imagined. You're not just my wife. You're my partner, my best friend, the mother of my child. You're the warm heart of this home, the gentle strength that makes everything better." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "You're going to make me ruin supper with all this crying." "One more thing." He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small, wrapped package. "I had this made in Denver. For today." Inside was a gold locket, delicately engraved with intertwining vines. She opened it to find 2 tiny photographs, one of them on their wedding day, the other a recent image of them together. "So you can carry us with you always," he said. "Wherever you go, whatever happens, you'll have proof of how loved you are." "It's beautiful." She turned so he could fasten it around her neck, the gold warm against her skin. "Though I don't need proof anymore. I feel it every day." "Still," he said, kissing the nape of her neck. "Sometimes it's nice to have something to hold on to." Ruth arrived for supper full of advice and gossip, the evening passing in comfortable domesticity. As darkness fell and their guest departed, Eliza found herself back at their bedroom window, watching stars emerge in the clear sky. Weston joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind, hands splayed protectively over their child. "What are you thinking?" She leaned back against his solid warmth. "About that night, how cold I was. How certain that I had nothing left to offer anyone. How you looked at me and saw something different. I saw you, just you. That was enough. I was so frightened. Of you. Of kindness. Of hope. Especially of hope." She turned in his arms. "Do you remember what you said about broken things growing back stronger?" "I remember everything about those early days. How careful we had to be with each other." "We're still careful," she said, "just in different ways now. Careful with our love, our life, this child we've made. But it's not fear anymore. It's recognition of how precious this is." He smiled, the lamplight catching the silver beginning to thread through his dark hair. "When did you get so wise?" "Must be all those books you let me read." She grew serious again. "Weston, I need to tell you something too. That first night, our wedding night, when you were so patient, so gentle, that wasn't just about overcoming fear. It was about learning to trust again, to believe that intimacy could be beautiful, not painful, that I could be myself, quiet, careful, maybe not as demonstrative as other women, and still be enough." "You're more than enough. You're everything." "I know that now. But then—" She touched his face. "You didn't just make love to my body that night. You made love to my soul first. And every night since, every morning, every stolen moment in the afternoon when we should be working, it's never just physical. It's you seeing me, knowing me, choosing me again and again." "Eliza," his voice was rough with emotion. "That's what I never had before, what Thomas never understood. That true warmth comes from being known and accepted, not from performing passion I didn't feel." She smiled through her tears. "With you, I feel everything, because you gave me the safety to discover what was always there, just waiting for the right person to unlock it." He kissed her then, deep and reverent, a communion that needed no words. When they parted, He led her to their bed, the bed they'd shared for 3 years, where they'd learned each other's rhythms, where they'd created the life growing within her. "Show me," he whispered. "Show me that warmth." And she did, with touches grown confident through trust, with sighs that came from genuine pleasure rather than obligation, with a heart wide open to this man who'd seen her truly from the beginning. Later, as they lay entwined, the baby kicked between them. Weston's face lit with wonder, as it did every time. "Strong little one," he murmured. "Like their father. Resilient like their mother." He grew thoughtful. "What will we tell them about how we met, how we came together?" Eliza considered this, her fingers tracing patterns on his chest. "The truth, that sometimes love comes from unexpected places, that healing is possible, that two people who thought themselves too damaged for happiness can build something beautiful together. And if they face heartbreak, betrayal, the kind of pain that makes them want to close off from the world, then we'll tell them what you told me, that the past only matters to the person carrying it. That warmth isn't about performance, but about trust. That broken things, carefully tended, can grow back stronger." She met his eyes, and that sometimes, on the coldest night, a stranger's kindness can change everything. Weston pulled her closer, and they lay in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of their ranch. Somewhere in the barn, horses shifted in their stalls. Ash padded through the house on his nightly rounds. The wind whispered through the cottonwoods they'd planted their first spring together. "Thank you," Eliza said suddenly. "For what now?" "For seeing me on that platform and taking a chance. For the cabin and the kitten and the patience. For teaching me I was worth waiting for." "Eliza Cole," he said firmly. "You were always worth waiting for. I was just the lucky fool who got to do the waiting." She smiled against his shoulder, one hand on her locket, the other covering his where it rested on their child. 4 years ago. She'd stepped off a train expecting one life and found another entirely. Found work that fulfilled her, friends who supported her, a place in a community. Most of all, found a love that had transformed her understanding of herself. She wasn't cold as winter stone. She never had been. She was careful summer rain, needing the right conditions to fall. Weston had been her perfect season, and in his patient warmth, she'd bloomed into the woman she was meant to be. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The baby would come soon, changing their quiet life in ways they couldn't yet imagine. The shop would continue growing. Life would flow on with its joys and sorrows. But tonight, in this bed they'd made sacred through trust and tenderness, Eliza Cole rested in the knowledge that she was home, not just in this house, not just in this town, but in the heart of a man who'd recognized her worth when she couldn't see it herself. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "And I love you," he replied. First night, last night, and every night in between. Outside, stars wheeled in their eternal dance. Inside, two people who'd found each other against all odds held tight to their hard-won happiness. And somewhere between heartbeats, their child moved a promise of the future, a testament to love's power to heal and transform. The seamstress, who'd never speak of her first night, had found something better than forgetting. She'd found a man who made every night a gift, who treated her trust as the treasure it was, who knew that true intimacy was built not in a moment, but over a lifetime of careful tending. And that, Eliza thought as sleep claimed her, was the greatest gift of all. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and exchange thoughts about this tale. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to my channel, Wild West Stories 1850. Give this video a like and hit the hype button to help more people discover these frontier tales of love and redemption.